Now, good morning. I'm Mark Allen with Gaper.io, and I'm here today with Eugene Krimkevich, the Strategic Partnership Lead at Envision. Good morning, Eugene.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us today. And I know we're both on the West Coast. What's the sky look like where you are today?
It is a slight tinge of orange,
Hmm.
like most of the state, I imagine.
Yeah, we're actually just a dull gray today, I think. I guess that's better. They said it's because the actual smoke has come down into the atmosphere farther, so it's not reflecting the orange as much.
Nice. Yeah, I guess that's progress. You
I
can't
guess I don't know.
say 2020.
So, to start with, can you share a brief background of yourself and your work experience?
Yeah, certainly. I just wrapped up a couple of years leading strategic partnerships at Envision. Before that, I helped lead platform partnerships at MindBody, which is a
Hmm.
SaaS wellness company in the kind of the business management scheduling space, and then started out my career at Chegg, which is a education technology company. They were one of the first companies to rent textbooks to college students. That's kind of how they got famous.
Hmm.
But I was a business analyst there for 2 years. So spent a lot of time in SQL and Excel, kind of building data models to inform strategy for other parts of the business. And through a lot of luck and a lot of mentorship, got onto the BD track, which is what I've been doing for the last 8 years or so.
Oh, very good. And interestingly enough, I happen to have the MindBody app on my phone.
Oh, there you go.
My gym is a member, and they've also got the branded app. So I used
Nice.
it. Well, I was using it regularly until about 6 months ago.
Yeah, it's been tough going for that segment of the market.
It has been. So what has been your experience with remote employment?
Yeah, so I joined Envision back in 2018. That was actually my first stint, and so far only stint with being at a fully remote company. For a little bit of background, Envision started back in 2011, I believe it was. So it started as a fully remote org, well before COVID hit and before remote became a thing. And the motivation, if I remember the story correctly, was really just hiring good talent. Envision is technically headquartered in New York, even though it's remote. That's where the CEO is based, and they needed to hire talented engineers and operations and everybody else. And it's really tough to compete in a market like that if you're hiring against Google and Facebook and everybody else that can pay spectacular salaries and stock options.
Hmm.
And they figured, like, we don't need to limit ourselves in terms of talent. If we're a remote org, we can hire from anywhere in the United States and frankly anywhere in the world. And that's what they did. So the company is distributed across, I believe, over 25 countries, if I'm not mistaken.
Well,
But yeah, fully remote company, 700 employees. And yeah, it's an interesting experience, although we'll get into this, but I don't think it was that different. At least in a partnerships capacity, it wasn't that different from being in an office and running a partnerships function, just because so much of what you do as a partnerships professional happens globally. Like, most of your partners are not going to be in the same city. They'll be in a different state, different country, different time zone. And so a ton of your work already by default is remote by nature. It's happening on Slack or Zoom or DocuSign or whatever you're doing in a partnership. But just by nature of the work, a lot of it just happens to be remote, no matter where you're doing it from.
and yeah, did they have other employees in close to you, or were you 100% remote and worked from home the whole time?
We're all 100% remote. I think California does have a pretty dense, at least if I remember right, it had a pretty dense contingent of Envision employees. Although I think I'm the lone wolf in SLO, but we had a few folks in Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, good chunk in the Bay Area. But yeah, the company, everybody works from home. They did have IRL or in real life events, so the company as a whole would get together every year, and then individual teams would get together multiple times a year. So there's still some in-person interaction, but your day-to-day is mostly you working from home or a coffee shop, at least when you can go to coffee shops back in the day.
Mhm. Yeah, I actually go to sometimes the Starbucks. Sometimes I go in by the water. I'm 2 minutes from the San Francisco Bay, so sometimes I just go down there. So
Nice.
yeah. So what do you think is the future of remote employment, and what do you think can be done differently to make it more effective?
Yeah, and in terms of the future, nobody really knows. I think there's obviously been a lot of change in terms of companies like Shopify or Facebook or Atlassian announcing that they will permanently support remote friendly policies. There's obviously companies like Envision or GitLab or TopTal or Automatic that have been fully remote and continue to be. So there seems to be a shift. I think the real question is like, what happens when this is all over in a year or two? Are those companies still highly supportive of remote policies, or do we go back to the old normal where now that there's not like a forcing function for remote, do companies want employees back in the office? There are, I think maybe last week or this week, I read Reed Hastings. I think he was quoted in the Wall Street Journal as saying remote work was a pure negative from his perspective. So
Really?
yeah, there's not a hard consensus. Like I think he's probably one of the rare people that's spoken out and said something like that. To call it a pure negative is a pretty strong opinion, but it definitely has its pluses and minuses. Like obviously one of the biggest challenges in pandemic times, at least, is the fact that if you're a working parent, you have kids at home. That's not how remote work is is designed to be done. I had the luck and privilege of doing that and working remotely before COVID hit, so I know how it should feel. I also know how it's like to have two kids at home. We have a 3-year-old and a 5-month-old. We got lucky in terms of timing because my wife was out on maternity leave when the new baby arrived, so I had it easy in a lot of ways. Whereas I knew a lot of working parents where both parents were working, both kids or multiple kids had to be in school or distance learning, which that's really not that's not how it's supposed to be done. And for people that don't like that method of working, like that's obviously very understandable. But I hope if anything comes out of it, it's not the fact that remote is better or that being co-located is better. It's the fact that employees can do good work if they're not in the office, and it makes sense to have a flexible policy that trusts employees to get things done, right? I think if you're hiring the right people and you trust people to do good work and uphold the culture of a company and care about their job, there's no reason you shouldn't trust them to be at home part of the time or even full time if you're supportive of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think I hear this a lot. It's that age group, like 2 to 5 or 6 for the kids, that they don't quite understand if mommy or daddy are home, that they're working. They're not, right?
Yes.
Usually a 10-year-old is like, okay, they can keep themselves busy. And teenagers, they don't even want to talk to you. So.
Yeah, there's my kids, or at least my oldest has Zoom bombed plenty of meetings. But on the flip side, like I think the other positive or silver lining that's come out of this is, for the most part, I think there's a lot more empathy going around for folks that
Yes.
that have to work either with kids at home or that, maybe they're even single, but they can't leave their apartment and they have a tiny space and they're just they're stuck alone all day. So it's very rare to get a glimpse into your colleague's daily life in that kind of a way. And I get a lot of people might be uncomfortable or sensitive to that, but I think people get it, right? For them, like I've never had somebody react like negatively or get annoyed like when my kid runs in, because the reality is like that happens to them multiple times a week. Right. So I think people are a lot more understanding and empathetic than perhaps they used to be.
Yeah, I think so. And you get to know a little bit about the person since you see them in their natural setting, right? So you do get that little bit better feeling for them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So what is the story behind Envision? What is your product? Who's your target audience? All those things.
Yeah, so Envision is a design tooling and collaboration platform for design and product teams. And when we think about a product team, you really think about EPD is the acronym that Envision uses, so engineering product design. And design really it's a function that has gotten on the map in a big way in the last several years, where the old paradigm around design and design teams was that they were there to push pixels, so to speak, and make things look pretty. And I think the paradigm, partly because of tools like Envision, but also partly just because of design teams and designers advocating for themselves, the paradigm has shifted quite a bit into design teams actually driving real business impact and impact on user experience, which sounds really obvious, but it's just one of those functions that I think was under indexed and not noticed as much. Just because it was such like a visual, creative, artistic discipline in a lot of people's minds. But a lot of functions within design have started to pop up around like design ops and design handoff. How do you get design work to developers in a really efficient way, which is one of the problem spaces Envision tries to solve for. So that's kind of a tool as a whole. And it has three primary pillars. One is Studio, which is a screen design tool, and is sort of like, if you think about where a designer is spending most of their time, it would be in a tool like Studio or Sketch or something like that, where they're designing the actual screens and the prototypes. There's Envision Cloud, which is the web-based platform. And that's really for collaboration, where you want to bring virtually any stakeholder from the organization, whether that's an executive, a marketer, a legal team, product manager, engineer, et cetera, into the design process and have them give feedback on dependencies within their function on that design, or really anything else about how that design should be refined. And then the third pillar is DSM, or Design System Manager. And that's essentially a product a little more towards the enterprise side of a market, but is really intended to drive really good design experience at scale, where oftentimes you'll find developers are rebuilding the same components over and over again. And when you have a global business with tons of different product lines, having design consistency and a clear design language across all those things is really important. Mm-hmm. And so that's what Design System Manager does, is it essentially not just generates a standard set of design components and allows you to track and update those things, but more importantly, links those to live code, which is what your developers care about. And so everything always stays in sync if designers or developers are making changes. You can be sure that you're going to be reusing the correct component within a design.
Yeah, so to summarize, is it like a tool for UI UX people to help them collaborate with the rest of the organization and build good design?
Yeah, I think the hero user of Envision is still kind of the UI UX designer, although if you actually break out the user numbers, more users are non-designers. They're collaborator personas, so you have lots of designers, lots of product managers in that tool, and that's just by virtue of the fact that as a collaboration tool, the whole point is to bring other personas into the experience. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the ratio of developers to designers on an enterprise team, for example, it's like 10-1, right? There's 10 developers for every designer. So just by virtue of that, you're going to see a lot more users who are not designers going into that tool.
Yes, but being in IT and not being good at design, you probably know a good UI UX person is worth their weight in gold.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And as long as they're getting more recognition for that as well, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I actually tell people now, if you're going to build a really enterprise website, a professional website, start with a UI UX person, because there's lots of people that can do the actual building of the site and do it very well, but a good UI UX person makes a huge difference.
Yep, indeed.
Yeah. So you said Envision has been 100% remote from day one.
It is, yeah. All the way back in 2011, I believe, was when it was founded. But yeah, it started with, it was essentially the founder and co-founder. They used to run a design agency, and I think it was an example of like dog fooding, right? We needed to solve our own problem around, we have all these clients, we're trying to collaborate around designs. Every different function has feedback about what this design needs. How do we solve for that? And so that's how Envision Cloud was kind of born and grew. And the company now, I don't know what the latest employee number is, but I think at the peak we had something like 850 employees all around the world, all fully remote.
So how did that, when you joined the company, how did you do that? Did you actually go to New York, or did you just on Monday you started out, and how'd that work?
Just went upstairs and that was it. I was at work. It was kind of uncanny. I've never had a long commute. So the longest commute I've ever had is 10 minutes, but yeah, just finishing breakfast and then just in 30 seconds, you're at the office. It's a little hard to get used to. It takes some time, but yeah, the whole onboarding process was remote. And so it was a full week of formal onboarding with an onboarding cohort. I think there were 20 or 30 people in the cohort. So you spend most of that week on Zoom, basically going through history of the company, history of design, and just some design fluency, because a lot of folks that join, at least in non-design functions or non-product functions don't have design background. Like I had zero design background when I joined the company. So very important to be able to speak that language and just understand, how the industry and tooling has evolved. So you spend some time on that. And then I remember, I think the last day or 2 days, we actually did a like mini design project with a cross-functional team within our onboarding cohort. So we had, I think every team had a designer because again, most people aren't designers, but it was like a designer. And then, yeah, you essentially got like a firsthand taste of how a user has to think about collaborating on a design, especially when you're not in the same room. And we used Envision tools to do that. So that was the onboarding experience. All the HR stuff, like filling out paperwork and everything, all of it is done online, as it should be, frankly. But yeah, it was really efficient, surprisingly really educational. It was actually probably the best onboarding experience I've had anywhere, really. And I think part of that is, when you onboard remotely, you have to be so deliberate and formal about what you walk employees through and how much time it's going to take and so on. And if you don't do that, right, it has pretty disastrous downstream consequences. If you just throw somebody in the water and they're like, I have no idea where to find things. And I can ask people on Slack and stuff, but I don't even know who to ask, right? Because I'm not in the office. So they did a really good job of that. But yeah, it was a totally remote process. Never had to go anywhere or fill out any manual paperwork or anything.
Wow, it's interesting, and I've heard that from different people that the remote part of it that's happened has forced companies to be more organized, for lack of a better term, right? Because they really have to think about all this stuff now. What exactly does it take, and how do we make these people feel like they're part of the organization?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a common thread, at least at the fully remote companies that I've been aware of and folks I've talked to there, is they just know how to be very deliberate about documentation, and not just in terms of like HR and employee onboarding, but even just knowledge sharing, right? Like how do you keep 600 people on the same page as a technology org when you move quickly and things change week to week? At a co-located company, maybe a little easier to do that just because you pick up a lot through osmosis, and it's easy to go ask somebody because everybody there and you know who to ask. It's a lot harder when everything is on Slack and you might not know how to search or find something, but a lot of that just has to happen at a remote company, or else the company just doesn't function like at all, really. So yeah, I think co-located companies seem to have made that transition pretty well. Some better than others, I assume, but yeah, I think like it becomes really apparent when you can't just tap people on the shoulder that like you need a clear process and documentation for how you share knowledge.
Yeah, true. So the current situation with the ongoing pandemic forced everyone to go remote. It would seem to me, with the nature of your product's collaboration tool, it would seem to me that would have helped your sales. So did that happen, and did that cause any roadblocks or challenges that you didn't expect?
Yeah, I'll speak to one specific product area that really started to take off. So Envision Freehand is it's a subset. It's essentially a feature of the cloud product, but you can think of it as like a Google Docs like whiteboarding tool. So it's a real-time multiplayer whiteboard where you can. The initial use case for the tool was ideation and wireframing. So before you go into like high fidelity or mid fidelity design, you're just sketching stuff out on notepads or paper. So that's essentially what it mimics, but for a remote team. And so when you aren't in the same room, a lot of people are so used to using a whiteboard to express ideas or workflows or really anything, even outside of design, right? Even if you're a teacher, you need that kind of medium. So freehand really started to get a ton of traction when the pandemic hit, because people were trying to basically replace that experience in a virtual setting. So there was a ton of accelerated feature development for that product. I think like even this week they just released a few feature upgrades, but yeah, it was a pretty big shift for a feature that really didn't get a ton of attention in the past couple of years. It had, I think like it had a lot of just kind of closet really dedicated users, but didn't make a huge splash. It was never like a huge part or focus of the product, and has since become like sort of a new like strategic pillar for the company in terms of product strategy. So that was definitely one of the bigger shifts that happened. I don't know that business like as a whole shifted, or maybe you know maybe the impact wasn't long lasting enough at this point to really understand what that shift was. But yeah, I think like you mentioned, anybody in the collaboration space, Zoom, Slack, Envision, et cetera, those tools obviously saw a lot of uptake with people trying to figure out like how you operate in this new world. So to some extent, I'm sure that benefited our business. I think in a lot of other ways, obviously it has drawbacks if people are cutting budget and they still need your tool, but they need less users for it. So I don't know necessarily how that balanced out for us, but I imagine it's pretty similar to how other businesses have experienced it.
Yeah. So finally, there's companies like Gaper that help develop, build, and scale products, especially for startup. You're not really a startup. And actually, since you're in strategic partnerships, how important do you think that will be going forward for companies like yourself that need to find, developers for other companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's huge, right? We talked about this a little at the beginning, but it was really the catalyst for why Envision started the way it did, was this need to find talent and the inability to pay like top dollar in the local market to do that. And so I think for founders nowadays and investors alike, right? I think there's a higher comfort level, partly out of necessity with operating and funding a remote org. But yeah, I think if you're a founder and you're intimidated by the fact that starting a company in the Bay Area, I have to compete with these massive tech logos, and how do I find the best engineers to work quickly? If you don't have that constraint anymore, right, and you can there's plenty of amazing engineering schools all over the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
And it used to be that, and maybe still is the case, that those graduates leave, right? As soon as they graduate, they go to the Bay or New York and they get jobs. And now you're essentially giving those people and the companies that hire them the opportunity to not have to do that, right? You can hire people where they live. They can have a reasonable cost of living and a great job, and all those things really. And as a startup and a founder, you get access to talent that you just otherwise would not have had unless you like relocate and found yourself in Nebraska or something. So, which is not a bad thing, by the way. But
Right. No.
yeah, it's I think it opens up the talent pool a lot. I think obviously there's a ton of conversations around diversity and inclusion and how companies do a better job at that. And I think this is kind of one of the understated areas of remote that I just don't hear a lot about for some reason. But yeah, I think when you don't have to limit yourself to like a Bay Area or a New York talent pool, it's kind of hard to start making excuses for why your organization doesn't look different. Because you can hire from anywhere, you can hire anyone, and it doesn't even have to be in the United States. You can hire all over the world.
Sure.
I think that was one of the things that struck me at Envision was just how like geographically diverse the company was. We had employees all over the EU, Argentina. We had a few folks in Africa, Australia, New Zealand. So the company, just by nature of that, was incredibly diverse geographically, culturally, and it made it a really interesting place to work. Whereas, obviously in the Bay Area, there's a ton of diversity just by virtue of a lot of folks having immigrated there. But it is a little different when you're just able to hire from anywhere you need to, and you can build the kind of organization that you want.
Yeah, and it's interesting you use the Bay Area and Nebraska, and I'm pretty sure if someone in Nebraska is thinking of moving to the Bay Area yesterday and it looked like the sky was literally on fire, they might think twice before they move here.
I'm sure people are probably, I mean, yeah, I've heard of sort of like a newer trend of folks, maybe not so new, but folks leaving the Bay Area or leaving high cost of living places. Because yeah, if you move to the Midwest, you can have land, you can have a huge house, you can have it for cheap. And like, there's still a big outstanding question, I think, in terms of compensation and how that gets dealt with in terms of why would I pay someone a California salary if they relocate, or why would I even hire anybody in California at all if I can hire high quality talent for a fraction of that cost? So I think that's still kind of a big open question, but yeah, I think overall that'll shake out in its own way. And the idea that people can live where they want and work where they want, and companies can still hire the best talent, I think all around that's a good thing at the end of the day.
Yeah, there are talented people everywhere. And I think what you're going to see is a lot of people, like if you go to the University of Nebraska, fine school. If you want to stay there, you might be able to work for a company in New York or in the Bay Area, a big tech company, but stay in Nebraska. And I think that's great.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. I'm sure that's, at least initially, it's probably very good for that community
Mm,
economically. Leads to a lot more economic development in areas that don't always have that opportunity, and a lot more economic diversity, right?
yeah,
I don't know much about the Nebraska economy, but
yeah.
I imagine the tech sector there is probably not as big as the Bay Area.
Hmm.
And so if you manage that growth wisely and you have people who have incomes and spread that around the community and economy, that's all good news.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that stuff's starting to shake out now, how that all works. Because you're right. Because if someone's being paid a Bay Area salary, and let's just say they moved to Iowa or North Nebraska, you're living like a king on the Bay Area salary in those areas, and so I think that will shake out over the next year or two.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be interesting to see where that stuff lands.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, Eugene, it's been great talking to you. Nice to talk to a fellow techie and someone also in California. And have a great day.
Likewise. Thanks so much, Mark. Appreciate it.
Bye.